Impact Teams Radio. Welcome to Impact Teams Radio, the show where we explore what it takes to be a leader of the leaders in corporate America. Get ready to be inspired and discover proven tips for going from average to exceptional. Now, here's your host and guide, Tony Sherman.
Hello and welcome. This is Tony Sherman from Impact Teams Radio, your host and guide. And we have another episode here, and we have a return guest this week, and our return guest is Sandy Sears. Sandy, welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Again, so thank you very much. As you guys know, when we have a second interview, we've learned something about our guests. We know about their background, where they're coming from a leadership perspective. So what we're going to do is what we traditionally do is take a deep dive. Sandy, are you ready for a deep dive?
I am ready.
Okay, so Sandy, I'm going to put you on the spot immediately. When you and I were talking beforehand, we were discussing the concept of transformations, and you said you've been in a lot of your leadership and your life, your work life and so forth, in transformational positions. What exactly do you see as a transformational position, and can you give us a couple of examples to start with?
Sure. I would see a transformational position probably being most common in projects, for example, which are supposed to produce a unique product or service. In organizational transformation, which is quite the rage these days. In operational situations where operations need to become more efficient or less costly. And also in team dynamics, in politics, in saving our environment, in living in peace, and in raising children.
Okay, so you gave me so many things to shoot at. That it was unbelievable. So let's pick two that sparked out. There was quite a number there, and I like the non-business ones that you pulled out at the end. But organizational transformation, I'd like to just unpack that one a little bit, but I definitely want to make sure we have enough time on the clock to talk about team dynamics, because I think that's really important, because that goes to the wider picture of what you were saying about peace. And, and the way we treat each other in a wider society. But organizational transformation, what sort of leadership positions have you held in those kind of roles?
I've held everything from a small team leader to basically a leader for final year of a transformation program. So I've had a range of leadership positions. And I would also like to mention that in a transformation, the leader is not necessarily the person with the highest title or even the title of manager. Leaders of transformations can come from any role.
I totally agree with that. I mean, leadership is based on passion, not position, as John Maxwell says. Correct. So
and those who are going to influence other people will be the leaders in a transformation.
And in fact, again, going to John Maxwell, who I admire a lot, he says if you want to measure leadership, the purest measurement of leadership is influence.
Yes, I would agree.
So in those organizational transformations, what about the transformation piqued your interest and made it an exciting area for you to be working in?
I'm fascinated by helping people to do whatever they want to do in a better way, and in a better way has a fairly broad definition for me. But I love to see people happy with what they're doing, proud of what they're doing, engaged and passionate about what they're doing. And transformations provide ample opportunity for all of those things to happen.
Yes, and I also think, going back to something you said in a previous episode, that the thing about transformations, it enables people to do more than they think they can do, because the transformation is always risky and always calls out different functionality and expertise than normally a team is used to.
Yes, I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
In fact, one of my ethoses, and you mentioned two words that I jotted down in my notes very quickly. One of my ethoses of working with people, is always assume positive intent. But one of my core assumptions about anybody I'm working with is that nobody comes to work with a desire to do bad work. Everybody wants to do a good day's work. And I like the fact that you said transformation allows people to be proud of what they do and engaged in what they do. And I think those are good measurements or good lightning rods, if you will, if you're doing a good transformation and allowing people to bring out the best in themselves.
I agree on that one as well.
So with the organizational transformations, what's been one of your biggest challenges?
The biggest challenge, quite honestly, is the fact that true transformation is something that never ends. And it is very difficult in corporate America and probably corporate world for a leadership team or a management, and here I mean really more of a management team, to sustain interest in a true transformation. It's particularly difficult for stock companies. It's even difficult for non-stock companies to maintain interest in line of sight for longer than 1 quarter to 3 or 4 years. And transformations, true transformations, probably take about 7 years. There's some academic work that's been done that indicates it's about 7 years for a true transformation to occur in an organization, such as a company.
So teach me about that a little bit, because I didn't realize it would take that long. I agree with your assessment about leadership and when they need something to be done, but I also think people themselves, that they like a season of productivity and stillness where things aren't always changing, which is hard because in today's society it's hard to get that. But I'm surprised that a transformation can take up to 7 years.
But the actual transformation itself, depending on how you define the transformation, changing the way things are being done will not take that long, but ensuring sustainment of that transformation is what takes much longer. And there are varying statistics that are available in the literature about how long it takes to truly transform. But I think the thing that we often miss is that part of transformation is sustainment activities. So it's not necessarily that things are constantly changing, although in corporate America today they do seem to be constantly changing. And change seems to be almost the goal in some cases. But if you want to begin doing things in a new way and you want to continue to do things in that new way because you consider it to be a good change, it does take a long time to ensure that that will be sustainable. If you think about children learning a musical instrument or anyone learning some kind of artistic skill, that does not occur quickly. And if you don't sustain the activities surrounding increasing your skill, you will very quickly lose that skill. And you may lose it entirely. And I think a similar thing is true for transformation.
So when we're talking about transformation, we're not really talking here about operational transformation, I assume. I assume we're talking more about cultural transformation. Is that fair?
Yes. I think even an operational transformation probably has pretty strong cultural implications if it's a major transformation. But yes, transformation has very broad dimensions. So culture is always involved. Skill and ability is always involved. Motivation is always involved. Leadership is always involved. And typically companies want to transform because they want to achieve, ideally, some goal of greater efficiency, lower cost, better products, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you automatically have to hit the cultural aspects of transformation as well as the others.
So I was drawing a little diagram while you were talking. If I was being led by what you've just explained to me on transformation, here's how I might approach it. And just tell me what you think the strengths or weaknesses are. I'm in state A, and I want to transform to state B. And that's going to take, let's say, 2 or 3 quarters to do the basic transformation, even a year and a half to get the new processes, new procedures in. But what you're saying is the tricky part is once they get to a perceived state B, sustaining it, deepening it, and making it a true part of how we work as a company is a lot of the ongoing work. Is that fair?
That is fair.
So here's how I think I would solve that. And I'm not saying fire everybody, but I'm saying is when you go A to B, you do whatever the best operational business re-engineering approaches would be. But once you get to B, be very clear on how you hire new people, because your new culture is their old culture. Because they're coming in and they know no different. And if you say this is our new culture, they will accept it and work in that new culture. So your new people potentially could be the lifeblood of driving depth of change into your organization.
On the face of it, that sounds very logical. What I would offer, though...
Go on, then.
What I would offer is that everyone comes with a culture. And so the culture that the new people come with can negatively influence the culture that they're entering, negatively or positively influence the culture that they're entering. And let me cite a book that I absolutely love. It's called Influencer, The Power to Change Anything, and it's by a gentleman named Kerry Patterson. There are some other authors, too. I apologize for not giving them credit. And he talks about really a matrix of things that have to happen in order to transform and sustain change. He talks about, if you think of a column of a table, he talks about motivation. So, do you want to change, basically? And then he also talks about ability. Do you have the ability to change? And within those two sort of categories, he talks about your personal aspect on both motivation and ability, the social aspect of motivation and ability, and the environmental aspect of, or the structural aspect of motivation and ability. And in each of the cells, if you think of the 3 things I mentioned, personal, social, and or structural, he talks about what do you need to do for the motivation and what do you need to do for the ability, and how do you sustain change. And if you think about, his book has just wonderful, wonderful examples of real change scenarios all over the world, including in medicine, in business organizations, and in many other types of circumstances. And he talks about hitting each of those 6 cells in order to ensure that change is going to occur. Because when you think about change occurring, what is going to motivate, if we just take the motivation column, what's going to motivate one person to change is not necessarily the same thing that's going to motivate another person to change.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So if I don't hit your motivation or your motivational driver as well as my own motivational driver, then both of us probably aren't going to change. And in fact, if we're trying to change just a process at work, I might undermine the change that's happening in that process because I'm not motivated to do things differently than I've done them in the past. And so what you find in corporate America is there's tremendous resistance to change. And the resistance actually is rational for the individuals who are resisting.
Yes. No, I'm thinking that through, and it's going back to my earlier example. It shows you the complexity, because if you've got 2 people and you've done your transformation to B, you've gone from A to B, and then MB, one really doesn't want to be there, one's gung-ho and like, okay, and say a third one's accepting, then you've got a lot of tensions in that you could slip back or whatever, which goes to your work on sustainability. But if somebody else comes in, my naive viewpoint, that would be good to concrete in the change. But you've just said, well, they're bringing in their own culture. So most new people try to make a mark by doing something different. and that could actually hurt the change. So, because it's too fragile at that point to take innovation. So you've got four people with completely competing forces, not necessarily from a Machiavellian perspective, just from a personal driving perspective, who all socially agree with each other, but individually are having different drivers.
Correct.
That is a great problem to work on. That is a leadership problem. If we go back to the John Maxwell comment about leadership being measured by pure influence, then the influence to get everybody aligned and sustainably aligned, and to get the social elements sustainably aligned, it's a lot of commitment and sustained effort.
Yes, and it's not something that comes naturally in corporations. It's not something actually that comes naturally in most situations. In the medical examples that Kerry Patterson cites in his book, he talks about trying to get doctors to wash their hands sufficiently to not transfer germs from one patient to another. And it's very difficult to get doctors to do that for a whole variety of reasons. And he shows how his model actually applies to inducing and sustaining behavior changes in doctors. And it's simply fascinating. And some key points are that what you want to do, we tend to think of transformation in terms of an outcome. In fact, you described it in terms of an outcome. We started with A happening and we end up with B happening, and then our transformation is done. But the real transformation is not in getting from point A to point B. It's in changing people's behaviors so that you can get from point A to point B, and then sustaining those behaviors.
Far more complex problem to solve. I preferred mine.
Yes. Absolutely. But it's much more interesting. I find it fascinating.
Yes. Yeah, it does. And for a leader, in fact, realistically, as this is a leadership podcast and show, well, for a leader, it should be the more fascinating and the more resonant, because if you're going to lead, your ability to transform people is really one of your core leadership competencies if you want to succeed.
Yes, I would agree. And those behaviors that people are going to change, or even if they're using the right behaviors, that needs to be sustained. It needs to be nurtured. It needs to be rewarded. It needs to be socially supported.
And I know with some of the elements of transformation that I've been involved in, one of the problems for leadership is potentially boredom, because you're really saying the same message again and again and again and again and again. You've got to keep it fresh, but you've got to keep it the same. Because if you start singing a different note, then people will either follow the new song as they perceive it, or they'll stop because they're like, well, we're always changing. If I sit still, there'll be another change in 3 months' time.
Exactly.
But the human nature is, once you've said something a dozen times, you think you're done. So for leadership, it's a challenge is to be consistent while not being boring, I think.
Right. And again, I think the model that Patterson has helps with that, because you're messaging in different ways depending on what cell you're in. Are you changing the environment? Then the message is different than if you're changing a person's ability to do something. And those things can always happen without the basic goal changing. But the messaging can vary quite a bit and yet have the same intended outcome. Because, again, you're messaging really about the behavior, not about the outcome.
Right. Yes. And in fact, that is almost a discipline in itself, because I find it hard not to run to the outcome thing. I want to know, when is it done? Yes. And that's not a healthy mindset for the kinds of transformation you and I are talking about.
Correct. And that's very counterculture in America, at least. I can't speak for all countries. but I can speak for much of America, and that is really counterculture.
I would say for Western. I would
Yes.
say for Western, because I've lived in Europe, I've lived in England, obviously, I would definitely say that's true in Western business cultures.
I would agree. In Japan, I think it's very different, particularly if you look at even if you look at business things, but if you look at non-business things, Japanese people will take years, decades, lifetimes to learn skills. Kabuki, for example, is something that it takes a lifetime to learn. Pottery in Japan is something that takes a lifetime to learn. And that's a transformation where the culture supports the sustainability of the transformation.
That's intriguing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I think on that note, Sandy, we have to close. We're way over time. So thank you and maybe I can invite you back for another bite at this, and we can, I actually have Kerry Patterson's book on my shelf, but it's been a while since I read it, and I know one of the things I'm going to be doing over the Christmas vacation is reading that book. So maybe I can invite you back in New Year and we can discuss it a little bit further.
That would be fantastic. Again, it's been a real pleasure.
Oh, Sandy, it's been fun. I literally looked at the clock and went, thank you very, very much.
And thank you. Have a wonderful holiday season.
Thank you. Okay, Impact Nation, you know what I'm going to say. I seriously would echo Sandy's recommendation of the book. We'll put it in the show notes. And yes, take one thing that you've heard today, put it into your leadership toolkit, exercise it for 6 months, and you will be a much better leader in 6 months' time than you are today. So until next week, this is Tony Sherman, your host and guide, signing off.
That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. Now go and apply these few gems. Make the wisdom you have heard your own. If you want to be part of our launch success, then please go to impactteamsradio.com/love and tell the world. If you want more and never want to miss a beat, please go to impactteamsradio.com/subscribe. If you have 3 minutes, we would love to see a positive review on iTunes. And until next time, remember to act on what you've learned, and you'll be ahead of most of the world. Impact Teams Radio.